My parents used to say, all of our culture and tradition is only a generation away, that we may not have it anymore. Just one generation can change a whole entire community, a whole entire tribe by something that one generation does or does not do. And to me, that's part of the food that we share together and the coming together as a community to support one another. That's who we are. That's who we are as Choctaw people.
We're looking for, this size right here. And it's thin and it's round and it's really tender. But when they start getting heads like them tall ones, it's hard to cook and it's tough.
Onions, I think in Latin it's allium, the plant that we call walled onions, grow pretty much all over North America. So they're actually pretty widespread geographically.
I think it's going to be passed on to the newer generations because they're more interested now, just like this little girl over here. She's learning a lot of things from the family, and she already knows what these are.
There are variations. On the East Coast, you see a plant that has a wide leaf, they call them ramps, but they are a really close cousin of the wild onions we have here in Oklahoma. So historically speaking, from what we can tell, many tribes ate onions in a variety of forms for a variety of reasons. Tribes as diverse as Kiowas that you might not would expect, to have been wild onion eaters, Apache people, up north, Ojibwa people. In fact, wild onions had such a significance at one time for Ojibwa people that Chicago is actually named after wild onions. Their word for wild onion means smells like skunk, and apparently there were tons of them growing there where Chicago now is, and so that's how Chicago got its name, was from those wild onions. So some differences between the ways in which and why, in terms of how we consume them now from then. But there's pretty good evidence that many tribes ate them seasonally, as would be expected, right? We still, eat them seasonally. It's always a spring thing when they're there for us, sometime between February and April generally.
But I see what you're saying on these.
Food and hymns, those are important. Our spiritual practices and what we eat on a daily basis, those are so much of who we are as a people. No matter what group you're talking about around the world, those things are very intrinsically part of who we are, so much so that we don't usually sit back and analyze it and think about the whys. But I can imagine in the same sorts of ways that the hymns got people through on the trail when they were going through all of that seeing some remnants of home here, seeing something familiar in the spring, particularly onions, that sign of new life, in the spring, the first thing that's coming up. You're seeing perch starting to run, the poke salad's getting ready, and the onions are getting ready. That had to make people feel some sort of comfort that there could be some kind of continuity in the midst of all of that destruction, something that was still familiar to families.
Primarily, Five Civilized Tribes has this event for wild onions, dinners and so forth, which brings people together and brings people of all different tribal groups together for fellowship and so forth. And it is a part of who we are. I mean, it is seasonal, it is a part of who we are, and we have good memories with it, so I'm assuming that as myself, for many of the people who come, they come and they see other people they know, and they've been to wild onion dinners with them, in my case, probably over 50 years, in some place, sometime. So it's quite an experience for us. And as I had indicated earlier, for most of us who do participate and who've been a part of it, and where onions was a part of our culture, it is a way of touching the past.
E-I-E-O, E-I-E-O, we taneho, E-I-E-O, taneho, E-I-E-O, 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 we taneho, E-I-E-O, taneho, E-I-E-O, 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 we taneho, E-I-E-O, taneho, E-I-E-O, 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 we taneho. E-I-E-O, Taneho, E-I-E-O, 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 we Taneho, E-I-E-O, Taneho, E-I-E-O, 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 we Taneho, E-I-E-O, Taneho, E-I-E-O, 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 we Taneho, E-I-E-O, E-I-E-O.
I think that churches and Wild Onion dinners play an important role in the fact that they give us a venue for transmitting this knowledge and for transmitting culture. And while we might not have to eat wild onions in the spring to survive, and we have other choices, not only is it that chance to reconnect with culture and experience something that our ancestors experienced, like playing stickball or going somewhere and going to a stomp dance. But it also, I think, we take those things into our body, and we don't think of food as much this way anymore as maybe we ought. Wild onions has been one of the dominant ways in which food sovereignty has been maintained. We've kept that aspect of being able to feed ourselves, and a means of cultural expression that's still there. What's going to always be here, if we choose to hold on to it, is those relationships that we have, with each other, as distinct groups of people. And that's something important. Wild onions, it may seem like here's a little plant, here's this little practice that we have, right? But cultural distinctiveness is actually one of the markers the BIA uses for federal recognition. Just like the Choctaw Nation, a lot of nations were threatened with the loss of federal recognition during the termination era. And then there are tribes that have never had recognition that still have distinct people groups, distinct groups of relatives. One of those markers the BIA uses when someone applies for federal recognition is cultural distinctiveness. If tribes do not maintain cultural distinctiveness, literally, they can be terminated by the U.S. government and lose that sovereign nation status. So there's so many ways in which that can happen. But I don't like to, I'm a big believer in the power of positive thinking. I'm a big believer in the power of words. So I see a future, and I'm going to speak a future, where there are plenty of Choctaw language speakers, where there are people who can think in Choctaw, which is a quite different phenomenon than thinking in English. There's a whole wealth of knowledge there that's embedded in those languages. There's a wealth of knowledge embedded in our ways. Like I said, that sometimes seems simple on the surface, going out and picking this plant. But the science and the knowledge that's behind that is so much more vast than it appears on the surface. And I think those things are just crucial to survival, not just literal survival, but survival as culturally distinct people groups, whatever we call ourselves at any given time in history, our relatives and who we are, maintaining that.